Back for food with a dollop of travel. Welcome, Kavita Favelle of Kavey Eats.
Thank you very much.
So you've got this incredible Instagram feed, and my wife loves lobster, and so I immediately see this butterflied lobster, and I'm curious right away, so many people photograph food for Instagram, but you do it impeccably. What's the secret?
Well, I have to say I'm very greedy. So if it takes me more than about 3 seconds to photograph it, it's not happening because I want to eat that food while it's hot. So, I usually know in advance which table I'm going to be using. Our dining table's got fairly good lighting. So it is always pretty much most photographs are on my mobile. Take a headshot. I'd probably take about 3 shots within, as I said, I promise, about 3 seconds. And then I don't look at them again until I finished eating. So there are occasional times where I look at them afterwards and think, oh, they're all out of focus. And then I just don't share them with you, I'm afraid. But I can't claim any careful styling or lighting or anything else. It's snapshot on the phone and then I get straight into eating.
It's something. I guess you're a particularly visual person. It's the place what may look like a normal bowl of noodles. I'm looking at one where it's the sauce bowl is cut off at a particular angle on the side of the noodles. That I think if it was just the entire collection of bowls, it wouldn't have the same effect. So.
I got into photography when I was about 11, which is a very long time ago. And I used to read a lot about things like, everything from composition to lighting and all of those things. So although I don't really think about it much anymore, I think in terms of composition, at least, my brain does it automatically. And I've usually got an eye when I'm grabbing those quick snapshots. I've usually got an idea in my head about what that composition will look like, and occasionally I know that I'm going to need to crop it a tiny bit to just tighten the shape, but I think it's just, yes, you're right, the composition is something I guess it took time to learn, I guess, but it's part of it. I think it's just how my brain works now.
And there's a lot of people posting about food everywhere on the internet. We'll go through some of your different platforms, but sticking with Instagram because it's one of the platforms that mystifies me the most. How do you grow a following? There must be millions.
I do not know. If you find out, please let me know. Honestly, I am probably not the person to ask. My following count has been static, I would say, for about 2 years, and by static I mean like within about 10 people. It doesn't matter. I could go to an event and meet 20 new people, and somehow if we all follow each other because we want to stay in touch, we've made friends, it will still stay the same. I genuinely don't know how Instagram works. I just enjoy it for what it is, and I've just stopped worrying. A few years ago I just stopped worrying about trying to grow. I mean, I would love to reach the 10,000 so that I could put the links in my stories. That would be the only thing, that's the only incentive for me, that it would be nice. But honestly, I've just stopped worrying about growing because it's been so long that I've been static. I just enjoy the engagement I get from the people that I'm linked with, and I love sharing pictures and stories anyway. So yeah, I can't pretend I understand Instagram at all, honestly.
Well, let's talk about food, which you absolutely do understand, and you've got this site, Kavey Eats, and it is a hobby blog, but as you've described to me, run professionally, and I find that appealing because there's a lot of hobby blogs that are not at all run professionally and tail off, and you've been doing this for some time now.
Yeah, it must be 11 years, I guess, at least. Yeah, I mean, when I say I run it professionally, I try and make the content good. I try and learn. I've got a lot less time. I know many friends of mine that are full-time bloggers, and I know that I have less time. So I kind of understand that. And, there are times when I think, oh, I wish I had more time to learn this or implement that. But with the time that I've got, I kind of balance between creating the content that I want to share, because I've always got stuff in my head that I'm dying to tell people, and balancing it a little bit with learning the basics of SEO, the basics of how to structure a post, the basics of, I mean, I've got my own ideas of the layout. I mean, actually the site in terms of pure design is due a bit of a redesign. Actually, it's been on my list of to-dos for a while, but at the same time, I'm not worrying about, oh, does this post rank number 1 on Google or number 2? I haven't got time or honestly enough interest, I guess, to really drill down into that. I have enormous respect for many of my friends that do it full time and have the time and understanding to do that. So when I say I try and take a professional approach, I guess I'm in my head, I'm always thinking that I am writing for somebody, hopefully someone that shares similar interests. So I always think to myself, I'm not trying to create a general magazine where 100,000 people could buy this magazine and they'd all be able to read it. I'm thinking, okay, well, I hope that readers that have similar travel styles, similar tastes in food, enjoy the same kind of things in their leisure time, I'm hoping that those people will find my blog and know that I'm writing for our shared interests. So I haven't gone down that route where I'm trying to genericize, I don't even know if that's a word, genericize my content so much that it appeals to masses. I try and write from my perspective, but with a view to the fact that I would obviously love people to read it. So it's professional in the sense that I try and do it as best I can, and I treat it seriously, and I don't like spending 6 months forgetting about it. It's kind of part of my life, but it's not professional in the sense that I don't spend a vast amount of money on it at all. Actually, I hardly spend any money on it at all. So it's kind of a balance, I guess, with most things. I think I'm going to give you that answer a lot, actually.
Well, it seems an efficient, if I could say, model, both for the reader and for yourself to produce it. So let's talk about the post on the top of your page. So a dish I just sampled when I had a real hankering a couple of weeks ago, karaage, Japanese fried chicken. So how does this model work and scale for you?
So at the moment, a lot of the recipes that I've shared are from, so I think I mentioned to you when we were chatting previously that at the moment I'm doing quite a lot of food content, and some of that is cookery book reviews. So I've always done cookery book reviews, and I've always developed those relationships with publishers of those books, and they will get in touch with me in the same way they get in touch with most media, letting us know about the new titles that are coming, offering us review copies. So I've always done that. But at the moment, not only have I got lots of great books coming out, but there's also, I have a small team of friends and volunteers who are kind of interested. So what I'll do at the moment is I'll ask the publisher to send the book to that person directly, and they will write a review. And when you write a review, very kindly, the publishers usually give you permission to do 1 or 2 recipes. So actually the karaage chicken, the one that you were looking at, I love that stuff, is actually an extract from the last book. Actually, that was one of the reviews that I wrote for a Japanese cookery book, which is beautiful. So a lot of the recipes at the moment, there are recipes that I do. The most recent recipe that's mine in terms of developed is a tomato tart tatin, which should also be maybe 4 or 5 posts back.
I see it.
That one's one of mine.
Yeah, I see you answered the question I had about what are the usage rights around these recipes. So this is anything you're publishing, you're getting permission as part of a review.
Yeah, and it's really good, actually. I mean, I think they obviously have that model there already, because most of the time, if newspapers are going to do a proper big feature, or, the big magazines and mainstream ones, they will expect to extract, they call it extracting a recipe, and they will always expect to publish 2 or 3 or more. So I've always just said, oh, am I allowed to publish? And these days it's just part of it. So I always ask to publish 2 or 3, because the recipes, it's one thing to tell someone all about this book and what the recipes are and how beautiful the photography is and how well the recipes are constructed. Are they easy to follow? But actually, the best way to show them is to be able to share a couple of recipes. So I love doing that. Plus, it's more content for me, so it's all good.
Yeah, as I said, it seems it's very clear, and I like organization. I like knowing what to expect and what I can find, and that structure, and thinking of it from the business perspective, it's I guess the word I said was efficient. It makes, for you're able to scale it a bit or template it, but have this creativity still and diversity of content.
I mean, what I usually do with those is I'm not really a control freak, but I am very analytical and quite structured. It's part of my job. It's part of my personality. So actually, when I say that I've got 3 people now that do book reviews, and they can write what they want, but at the same time I have a structure guide, so I send it out to them and say, these are the 7 or 8 topics that I'd like you to touch on. I don't care how you do it, I don't care what order you do it, but I would love you to touch on these. So I don't kind of just send them a book and say, yeah, write something. I kind of say, here's a rough outline, within that, it's actually very loose. So they've all got very, very different writing voices, as do I. I mean, we all have different voices, but within that, hopefully people can say, I would love to think that they might say, oh, that's a Kavey's book review. I can tell because it mentions these things and all these different aspects that I want to know about. Partly because, honestly, when I used to first read book reviews on other blogs, I would get really fed up because basically they just repeated the press release and nothing else. They added absolutely nothing. And I found that incredibly frustrating because I was like, if I wanted that, I could just read it off the Amazon book blurb, to be quite honest. What I want to know is, what's the book like to use? You know, are the pictures good? Is the instructions clear? Do the recipes actually work? That's the stuff I want to know. So when I write them, I'm trying to write them as if I would want to read them.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, yeah, that's what I try and do anyway.
And you've really honed it. If your archive is correct, you go back to 2006. Blog.
Yes, I started the blog in 2009. This is going to sound slightly strange. So before that, I realized at that point that I had been what I refer to now as stealth blogging. And all I mean by that is that there were a bunch of different food boards, you know, like discussion boards on the internet back then. And I would share stuff. And essentially I was writing restaurant reviews. I was writing kitchen equipment reviews. I was writing about cookery books and restaurants and all sorts of things. But I was posting them on these various discussion boards because I didn't really think about having a blog. So that's why I kind of say I was stealth blogging. I was doing the writing, but not actually putting it in a blog. So I kind of, when I did start the blog in 2009, I went around and pulled all those bits and pieces that I'd written previously and put them in that repository because I thought, well, that means I can look at them when I want to look backwards. But the other thing I would say, and I don't know if I mentioned it to you when we were chatting before, but the first food website I created is still out there. It's called Mumpter's Kitchen, and it's my mum's website. And that website we launched in 2001. So that really was one of the first food websites, really, that it was much older. It's been going a long time. So I was already used to some parts, but that's not quite a blog structure. It's a little bit different. It's almost like a family cookbook on the web, I would say. So that had been going for, my maths is really bad, 8 years by the time I started my blog. So yeah,
I had a Persian classmate in high school that a family member was named as Mumtaz. Is that part of your background?
No, yeah, it's not, but it's an Indian and Persian name. So the Taj Mahal is named for Mumtaz. Yeah. Mumtaz Mahal is kind of, it's the burial. I'm trying to remember the name, not cemetery, but kind of memorial or memento for this queen. Yeah. So Mumta or Mumtaz is basically the same name. It's just variations, I think, in slightly different versions of the Asian languages. So yeah, my mum and dad are Indian, but the name is kind of Persian and Indian, and yeah.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I had gone to some of the Persian food posts on your site. Some of my favorite in elusive where I am in Seattle. Normally, I could go to Los Angeles if I really wanted to, but times are different.
Yeah, I'm really missing. So my husband and I moved from London to Wales last year, which is a massive difference because I was born in London. I've always grown up in cities. I've always considered myself to be a city girl, you know, very much so. And we have now moved into a tiny little village in Wales. It's such a small village, although it has a pub because, you know, this is the UK. It doesn't have a shop. It doesn't have anything actually other than houses and one pub. But the advantage is we have this vast, huge garden that's green and there's trees. And, you know, I think the oak tree there has probably seen, I don't know how many generations of human beings. It's that old. So it's very different and we love it. But the biggest, probably, it sounds really silly, but the biggest thing I miss is the food scene in London because you can get virtually any cuisine in London. And I took full advantage of that. I loved all the different, not just Chinese, but lots of regional Chinese, from Taiwanese to Sichuan to all these different, and plus Malaysian and Vietnamese. And I have a huge passion for East Asian and Southeast Asian food. And that's probably one thing that we do miss having moved. There's nothing local to me. We can go down to Cardiff and Bristol, but as you said, times are slightly unusual at the moment, so travel is a bit restricted. But on the other hand, we're trying to cook more of those cuisines at home and trying to learn more Thai and Malaysian and Indonesian and so on. So, you know, there's always a silver lining, isn't there?
Yeah, and you get, if you're looking at the analytics for your site, I'm sure you get a particular view on what what cuisines are popular, and so this is for people attempting at home, maybe a little different than where they would eat out. What do you see in your?
I never even thought to look. Honestly, I have to say, you've said that, and I've just thought, oh, why haven't I thought to look at that? I've never looked to see which cuisines are more popular. Actually, this is what I mean a little bit by I go as much as I can into learning about SEO and things, but I probably don't have time to delve into it. I mean, actually, now you've said that, I'm going to have to go and look it up afterwards. But no, I don't know. I do always find, the thing I do find is the posts in terms of recipes that are the most popular are not the ones that I expect will be. So at the moment, for years, actually, the two most popular recipes on my site is a recipe for a chicken pasta, roast chicken pasta tarragon bake, basically leftover roast chicken, a dish to do with that. And that is by far that one, and Japanese yakitori chicken hearts. Those two recipes I would never have predicted, but they are far and away the most popular. But I mean, by a country mile, honestly. So I realised that I don't try and predict anymore what people will like. And I know there's all this stuff now where you can do keyword research and work out what topics you should write about. But part of me is like, well, the reason I blog is because I have things I want to write about, and I kind of just hope that people will want to read about them. But what I don't do, and I probably should if I wanted more readers, but hey, what I don't do is that thing about thinking, okay, I should find out what will be popular and then write about it. Now, if they coincide, that's brilliant. But I have to say, I kind of write about what I really fancy writing about. So.
Well, and I love that as I browse through the archives, going back a few years, your pour over coffee recipe is one that my wife is not a regular coffee drinker, and so we're not gonna, maybe once or twice a month. So we want to look at something very simple that she could pull out, but not something that takes up counter space or elaborate. So that I appreciate that eclectic nature as I've been diving into the archives.
Then I'll write about it, and I think the same with travel. I write about travel the way that I travel. So I don't like beaches. Neither my husband or I like beaches. So when we did one of the posts that I did a couple of years ago that again has proved quite popular is a Thailand itinerary, a 3-week itinerary, and then various other posts about aspects of it. But the itinerary has no beaches, which most people would say, but why are you going to Thailand with no beaches? But we're just not into them. Likewise, it doesn't have family activities because we don't have kids. So I know that by not including those aspects that some people will not find what they need on my site. But what I'm hoping is that people that also don't like beaches and don't have children will find what they want because they've got that shared interest. So I don't try and write about the things that aren't relevant for me. I just write about the things that I can write about.
Fantastic. And I've also learned that there's a Halloween courgette, which there's a few of the
You've really gone back in the archives. Oh my God.
I've been enjoying and diving through, and
Oh, that's hilarious. Yes, I wanted a pumpkin. I couldn't find a pumpkin. We were growing those globe courgettes, and I was like, Halloween courgette, or zucchini, I should say, for you guys.
Yeah, and that's some of those, like, why am I blanking on the word that you guys use such a wonderful word for what eggplant?
Aubergines.
Aubergine. Yeah, that sounds so sophisticated. And
I know. Well, to be honest, I never understood for years. I was like, eggplant. What is that? And then finally, not really that long ago, I saw those little white aubergines or eggplants, and they look just like little white eggs. And I was like, oh my God, it's really obvious when you see those, but my entire life, I'd only seen the big, the red purple ones. And I'm like, eggplant? What the? So yeah, I finally worked out that there are a type of aubergine that does look exactly like a little white egg. And I was like, okay, now I understand.
Which I don't know that I've ever seen. I've only seen big purple looking things.
Only in the last few years I've seen them. I was just like, that explains it. Basically, I don't know where eggplant comes from, but I think with zucchini, you guys just use the Italian and we use the French. So it could have been either, I guess. So courgette is French and zucchini is Italian. But eggplant, I don't know where that came from. But now I've seen them, it kind of like makes sense.
So eggplant or aubergine, actually, I was in our Asia family market grocery shopping 2 weeks ago, and they had neatly organized, and they were all different purple versions, but they had a Japanese eggplant, Chinese eggplant, Filipino eggplant, Thai eggplant, and there might have been one that they claimed was India, or there was 5 or 6 total, and they were all different shapes and tastes. But we sampled some, but I didn't buy the whole set to figure out which.
No, that would probably be a lot of aubergines to cook in one go. I've seen the Thai ones because they're kind of small ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen any of the others. But when we went to the last time I went to Canada, I love the food markets in Canada. Certainly, we were around Quebec and oh god, my brain's gone blank. Where Montreal and Toronto is. My brain's gone blank. It will come to me. How awful my geography is suddenly. But there's all these fantastic farmers markets. And they had, they wouldn't have just one variety. They'd have all these different colors of aubergines, likewise, all these different colors of tomatoes, all these different types of carrots. And it was just, honestly, I spent hours literally. I feel quite bad for my husband because I would quite literally spend hours walking around with my mouth probably hanging open, looking at all these things in the food market. I can spend hours in any food market, any country I go to. If you let me loose in a food market or a supermarket, I could be lost for a whole day.
That inevitably leads to the questions with the markets that are your favorite or most stimulating. For me, the ones that jumped to my mind were Central Asia markets, which you've written about, like Tashkent and that. And it's not necessarily the endless variety that some other parts of the world might have, but just the colors, the sizes, the smells, everything.
I think for me it's East Asia probably more. So Vietnam, Thailand, Japan are different. They're also fascinating but very different. But I think what I love is the fact that it's just crazy and chaotic and fantastic, particularly Vietnam and Thailand, which has been probably 2 of my most recent trips. There's just but also there's so much stuff that I don't know what it is. And I love that. And I'm like, wow, there's just in that one lady's stuff that she's got spread out in front of her, there are at least 10 vegetables and herbs that I have never seen in my life, or fruits, and I love that. So this time when we went to, we were very lucky with timing. We went to Vietnam this February for 3 weeks, and we kind of came back virtually almost just before lockdown, really. And it was one of those things that I loved, was just literally, I found so many fruits that I'd never ever eaten before, which was fab. I love that. So I think it's that. I think it's just all these things that I haven't seen before. And even when we were in Hong Kong a few years ago, we went out to the new territories and went to a wet market. And they had one floor that was all fruit and veg. They had another floor that was all meat and fish. But it was and another one where they were doing fresh noodles and stuff. But so much of it was food that I have never seen and didn't recognize, and therefore wanted to know, hey, what is it? What do you make with it? How do you cook it? And sometimes, obviously, there's a bit of a language barrier, so I can't always ask everything I want to. But on that particular occasion in Hong Kong, we had a guide with us so that I could ask stuff through her. So yeah. I mean, I end up scribbling frantic notes afterwards because I'm, much as I have a massive interest, I'm senile old cook, so I can't remember all of it. So I ask all these questions, and hopefully, if I'm lucky, 10% of it stays in there.
Yeah, I was thinking around this idea of buying a bunch of stuff. I'm the dishwasher in the family. My wife is great experimentation, and most of the time, if I get something that I'm curious about, she'll dream up something. She's from Shanghai, and Chinese are generally very creative.
Amazing instinctive cooks, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even the TV shows where they have famous chefs in China, they usually pair somebody who effectively is a clarity translator, because these chefs are just not even used to speaking in any clear way that anybody could follow what they're doing. Or somebody is like, when you meant a something of something, did you mean like a little bit of this, or like how many?
To be honest, so when my mum started that website back in 2001, essentially how it came out is my sister and I didn't really learn Indian food when we grew up cooking from her, because she'd only cook Indian maybe once or twice a week, and I don't know, we just didn't learn it. Whereas my family that are still in India, they would all have learned Indian food growing up, how to cook it, but we just didn't. So when my sister and I both went away from to university, we could work out how to cook a roast dinner. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science. What we couldn't do is suddenly think, oh, I really miss my mum's lamb curry. I really, so what we missed was the Indian food that she'd cooked once or twice a week. So we'd end up phoning her, and she started off writing kind of, the old library cards, the index cards that you used to get. So she'd be writing 2 copies of each of those. And a cousin of ours said, oh, I want a copy too. And suddenly it was like, oh, well, the web's, taking off a bit. So we created the website. But when she first started, I remember standing next to her, and she was creating something. She was writing down a recipe, and she'd write down 1 teaspoon of something. And I'd see her grab a thing. And I was like, Mum, you just threw at least 2 tablespoons in. And she's like, I don't know, I do it by feel. And I was like, yeah, I get you can do it by feel. But for those of us that aren't familiar, we don't have that skill to be able to just look at it and taste it and say, oh yeah, it needs more cumin, or oh no, it needs a little bit. I can't do that. I still can't do that. So I would have to say to her, no, when you're making it and you're doing it in order to write it down, you have to actually weigh out what you're putting in. And then if you realize in 5 minutes time that you need a bit more cumin, you need to go back to your notes and adjust how much you put in. And actually she got used to that really quickly, and she's always done that. But at the beginning, she was such an instinctive cook, like I think, you were describing your wife, that she didn't really think of, she'd say, oh, well, you just do it to feel, or you do it to taste.
Yeah. You put in the right amount.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you can never completely make it a foolproof, because, your cumin could be slightly more pungent than mine. So, it's never going to be exact. But at least now that she measures it really carefully when she writes it down, then it can be. And it's the same for mine. I mean, I used to be an IT trainer, so I would be used to writing instructions and training manuals, and now I'm a business analyst. So it's similarly, being precise is incredibly important. It's pretty much the whole of my job, really. So when I write a recipe, I'm never going to succeed entirely, but I try and think of, okay, what things am I assuming that someone will know? Let me try and step backwards and say, oh, actually, what if they don't know that? And things like, oh, put it on as a simmer. Not everyone knows what that would be. And, there's lots of instructions that I think I read recipes and I'm like, oh, I don't really know. I don't really know what that means. Do they mean bone in? Do they mean I should take the bones out? So I try and put those extra instructions. And it's because I know that really good cooks do it so instinctively that they don't notice. But those are not the ones that are looking up the recipes. The people looking up recipes are people like me, where you're like, okay, that's great, but when I don't know what I'm doing, I really want some baby step instructions. So yeah.
Debjit in the audience is saying, asking an Indian to spell out measurements is a strict no. I'm an excellent cook, but terrible at sharing recipes, as everything is to taste.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely, 100% agree. It took my mum practice to do that, but she was so keen to get these recipes into a format. Originally, we never intended Mumta's Kitchen to be for other people. It was literally a book, a recipe website for me and my sister, for my cousins. So our family is spread between the UK is just me and my sister and my parents, and now my sister's kids. But in America, we've got a lot of family, and we've got a lot in India. So we wanted this website so that we could share recipes. It never even occurred to us at the beginning that other people would be interested. But at the time, there were quite a few of us, like me and my sister, that didn't have that kind of instinctive to taste. And we're like, okay, yes, I can taste it. And now I've been cooking her recipes for 20 years. Following her recipes, yes, I probably could adjust it a bit, but back then when I was starting, so I was like, you need to write it as if it's someone who has never even seen these bloody spices before, Mum. You have to be really like, and yes, there's an adjustment. So the idea was, okay, once you've made it a couple of times, if you think, oh, I really wish it had a bit more, by all means adjust it. And she always says to people, take the recipe as the starting point. And I would be the same. I think someone commented on one of my recipes saying, oh, I hope you don't mind if I change it. I'm like, no. Absolutely, do whatever you like. The whole point is the recipe is either a starting point or a set of instructions or something just to inspire you. I have absolutely I'm not precious about people saying, oh, you didn't follow my recipe. And unless they turn they're right, I switched the butter for I don't know, no fat something, and I didn't want sugar, so I used Splendor or some other sweetener, and I don't like plums, so I use bananas. Your recipe shit, it doesn't work. And those always do make me laugh, because I'm like, but actually I love it when people say, oh, I used your recipe, but then I added this and we really liked it. And I was like, brilliant, that's great.
Fantastic. And I actually had your Mumta's Indian lamb meatball curry recipe queued up to ask you, so I've included the show notes. And since you have family in the U.S., you may be aware that lamb, goat, mutton has
It's
a
hard to get.
terrible reputation, and if anybody, they either had something when they were young in school that was too gamey smell for them, or they saw the Seinfeld episode about mutton and they can't keep a straight face. But when I lived in China and colleagues would visit from the U.S. and I would take them to, say, a Xinjiang place, so the Uyghur cuisine, they would love it. So how to get people that are put off by...
To be honest, I mean, the good thing is if they're doing something like meatball lamb curry, or actually any of the lamb curries, my mum also does a keema curry, which I love, which is essentially the same idea, but just staying as mince rather than putting it into balls. But because there's all those beautiful spices, it's not like you're getting pure lamb taste. I mean, you can taste the lamb, hopefully, if you've got good quality lamb, but it's not the same as having just a plain old lamb chop or something. I mean, I love lamb. I love the flavor of lamb. I was always quite curious, really, as to why lamb hasn't been popular in the US, and I think partly it's because your landscape is so well suited to the cattle that I think cattle farming is what kind of grew, and it's not necessarily the landscapes. I mean, a lot of the UK is quite hilly and not actually suited for other agriculture, but actually sheep do really, really well there. So I guess it makes sense that we have a lot of sheep, but from what I understand, I think lamb eating is finally falling a little bit in the UK as well, which I think is a huge shame. It's a beautiful meat. Mutton shouldn't really be tough either if you get good quality, but I appreciate the reputation it had. I think a lot of that reputation is from Second World War era, when there were a lot of sheep that were probably quite honestly past it and we were eating them anyway. But I don't know. I mean, I adore lamb. I find it a beautifully sweet kind of meat, like people say lobster is sweet. That's kind of what I mean. I don't mean it's actually kind of scallops and lobster. I always think of slightly sweet seafood, and I would say lamb reminds me of a slightly sweet meat, but I don't want people to think it tastes like sugar or something, because we love it, and we've got a freezer full from a farmer's market up the hill from us. The one guy that brings this it was his last of the season, so we cleaned out the remaining the bones, the hearts, the livers that he had left, and others would. We have a lot of stuff as well. Again, very lucky timing. About 3 days before lockdown, but a couple of weeks before lockdown here, I had been liaising with a farmer to buy a whole lamb. So I'd get the date, and we agreed. And I went over and visited. I met the sheep, which I know people think is a bit freaky, but they were rare breed, and I was really interested to learn more about them. And we discussed which cuts, because what I hadn't realized is, of course, you've got a choice that, do you want the leg this way or do you want it cut into these? And so this was all a bit of an education. And then the Friday before I went into lockdown on the Monday, she delivered a huge box of a whole lamb, so we've probably got about half of that in there.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So it was beautiful timing, given that we suddenly, because on my job actually went into lockdown a week before the rest of the UK for reasons I won't go into. So we were stuck and not going out a little bit sooner than everyone else. So I was like, oh, that was such good timing. Yeah, very lucky.
That's incredible. And related to that, I feel like certainly in American households, cumin is not that prevalent, but it can do such wonders, especially with meats. I'm wondering how to get somebody to put cumin on their spice rack, what to do with it.
The thing is, if they love, weirdly, I find that you can get Middle Eastern food more in the US than you can get Indian food. And actually that uses cumin quite cleverly as well. And particularly if people have been on holidays to places where they have those lovely lamb or beef kebabs and stuff, quite often they'll have a bit of cumin through them. And it just gives a really nice savory flavor. I must admit, I'm not very good at describing, like if someone said to me, can you describe cumin versus coriander versus, I'd probably struggle, but I can recognize the tastes of each of them, obviously. But I mean, I think that's why I've always learnt it from my mum, is to how to balance those flavors. But they definitely bring something. It's like the other flavor that I'm really into at the moment is harissa paste from the Middle Eastern areas, and it just brings a punch of flavor and chili, and it's like the quickest way of adding flavor to something. It's just crazy. So I mean, and then the other thing I would say with spices is people are very scared of buying a bit and then not using it all. So if you don't cook Indian or Asian food that often, you're like, well, hang on, if I have to buy coriander and cumin and fennel and blah, blah, what am I going to do with them? And what my mum has always recommended, and what we do now, obviously based on my mum, is we put small amounts into a jar that we keep in the spice rack. The rest of it goes in the freezer. The spices will last fine in the freezer. And likewise, I would normally go to an Indian or either an Oriental or an Indian grocery shop and buy the big packets of spices that sit in the freezer, and then just put a little bit in my spice jar. Because obviously the longer it's out, the more it will go stale, but it's not going to go stale in the freezer. So if you're worried about it and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that because I might waste them, go ahead, buy them, but just keep the bulk of them in the freezer and just keep a little bit out in the jars, and that will help them last longer.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, makes sense. I can see that thing about, I've got this big big bottle to use up. Well, we've got a follow-up comment, dreaming of Sichuan cumin lamb. So you mentioned regional Chinese cuisines, and a regional Chinese cuisine that fascinates me is this particularly popular in say West Bengal, the versions of Indian Chinese food. Are you a connoisseur of both?
I can't bear them. I can't. I'm so sorry. I remember when I was a kid and we used to go to India every few years to visit family, and it was always fascinating because my sister and I, having been born here, the things that we would find fascinating there, our cousins would find it hilarious that we were so surprised at some things and not used to others. But the first I always loved Chinese, and so the first time they took us out to Chinese, I think I probably cried embarrassingly. I mean, I was only little, but it was so not what I think of as Chinese, and it was so because Chinese cuisine has been in that part of India for so long, it's kind of become a natural fusion, and I completely get it, but it didn't taste anything like what I knew of as Chinese. And to be fair, what I knew of as Chinese back when I was a kid probably wasn't any relation to what you get in China either. I think I've got much more familiar now with what one might call authentic regional Chinese. As a kid, I probably didn't really, we used to get sweet and sour chicken and black bean chicken and crispy aromatic duck, and there was a sort of a set of dishes that you would find in Chinese all across the UK, and that's what I in my childhood thought of as Chinese food. And when I went to India and tried this Indo-Chinese, I genuinely, I was just like, but it all tastes like Indian food. And obviously that wasn't entirely true. It is a combination. But yeah, I hated it as a child. I don't think I've ever given it a fair chance since then. I think I was probably traumatized.
Do you all have a family transatlantic yogurt starter?
No, we have got a sourdough starter. I haven't got a yogurt starter. My mum always used to make yogurt when we were kids, and we used to love it. My sister, there's when you make homemade yogurt, you get that really thick layer on the top. And me and my sister would fight over that. So if there was any hint of one of the sisters getting more of their share of that top thick layer of yogurt than the other, that would be hell to pay. But I've never really made yogurt. So I don't have a yogurt starter, but I do have a sourdough starter called Pussy Galoaf. Pussy Galoaf is the reason she's called Pussy Galoaf is her mother is an Australian starter called Priscilla. Priscilla is named for Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And my very beautiful and lovely friend Celia she's an Australian blogger. She years and years ago sent out, she dried some of her Priscilla and sent it out all around the world to various friends. And the only thing she said is, I would really love it if when you name your starter, you also give it a drag queen name. So that's why mine is Pussy Galoaf. So it's Pussy Galore, but it's Pussy Galoaf. Yeah, so that's the only starter we have. No yogurt starter, sadly, although I do want to make yogurt. So it's on the list for one day. One day I will make yogurt.
I asked because a few months ago I had read an article, I just put it in the show notes, about Indian diaspora families smuggling their yogurt starters around the world past customs, and absolutely, I could see that. I could absolutely see that happening. And their favorite spices, and when I think it's the same. To be honest, any families that emigrate, when people visit from the home country, I guess, or the other way around, when you go there and come back, you're gonna smuggle in all the things that you can't easily find. I mean, now in the UK, there's not a huge amount of Indian ingredients. I mean, there probably are some fruit and veg that are specialists that you can't easily find, but even those you can often find in the UK. But when I was a kid, there were a lot of Indian ingredients that were probably quite hard to come. So certainly, when family would come,
they'd be asked to bring this or that, and I'm sure that's the same for anybody that's emigrated from anywhere really, where the ingredients are really different. I can imagine. I mean, when I was a kid, going the other way, we used to go to America and visit my cousins, and I got very excited by, don't laugh, Lucky Charms. So we did not have exciting cereals in the UK at the time when I was a kid. I mean, we've got everything now, but when I was a kid, you had cornflakes, Weetabix, maybe bran, I don't know, really, honestly, nothing, no chocolate ones, no sweet ones, nothing aimed at children. I think we had Sugar Puffs. That was the only kids one, and they were incredibly boring. And I get to America and you've got aisles full of children's cereal, and Lucky Charms was the thing. And honestly, even now, if someone comes from the US and they bring me a packet of Lucky Charms, they are my friend for life. I mean, I'm like, Lucky Charms, you brought me Lucky. Which
that is one that I will enjoy as a rare dessert. It's an incredible experience.
Colors, and I'm like, I love the artificial colors. Bring them.
I mean, yeah. I guess I'm thinking of some of the. Gosh, what's the name of that really famous dessert place in Mumbai where the colors are almost as neon or more neon as.
I don't know. Mumbai, but, yes, there's certainly. There used to be when you used to get Indian. There's Indian restaurants here that I would always call a curry house. I don't know if that term is one that's crossed the Atlantic, but it's kind of a curry house is almost like a British Indian restaurant. So it's not, it was in the days before you might get, oh, this restaurant is specifying in this particular regional cuisine. It was kind of a pan-Indian. I always call that a curry house. I think that's quite a common term here. And it used to be that the curries in curry houses were bright red or bright yellow, but I think in the last 10 years they've really dialed those colors back. I suspect there's more regulation and stuff about some of the more lurid colors that you can use, so they're not quite as bright, at least, but they've dialed back.
Yeah, the term hasn't necessarily crossed, but certainly there are many Indian restaurants around the U.S. and so I'm prefacing this by saying when we're traveling small town U.S., you're going to have a choice of McDonald's, Subway, those.
Taco Bell.
Maybe a Chinese buffet and maybe an Indian buffet.
I was going to say I've come across quite a few Chinese buffets in the US. I think I've probably been to about maybe 30, 35 states. I'd have to work really hard to remember what the list was without referring to notes. But yeah, I mean, there's chains in the US that I love. I became quite a fan of Cracker Barrel. What's the waffle? Is it the Waffle House?
Oh yeah.
Denny's, the ham and cheese thing with the eggs over easy, as you guys call them. I think when they're new to you, they probably have a bigger fascination when they're something that's, it might sound strange to an American that something like a Denny's could be considered exotic, but for a kid from Britain in the 1970s, Denny's was very exciting. Same with Taco Bell and I'm just trying to think some of the other chains that we started. Red Lobster, oh my God, love it. And yet my friends in the States will say, well, that's not really it's not what we would say is a high-end restaurant. I'm like, I don't care. It's got unlimited lobster. We don't get that here. That doesn't exist. The things that you catch on to when you go to a different country are quite often completely bemusing for the people that live there, which is the same. I mean, when people come to the UK and, they get really caught up on afternoon tea in a posh hotel and we're like, yeah, we guys, we don't really do that. But it's the same as me when I go to the US or when I go to India or anywhere, the things that I get excited about, the locals, it's like, whoa, why is she so excited about that? But that's part of the travel. I think it's part of the nature of travel.
And I did find it. It's Badshah's Faluda in Mumbai that I was thinking of. That
is the neon food.
Yeah, I just love the royal Faluda. But those Indian restaurants in the U.S. Now there's some very nice high end, but as I'm saying, when we're just tooling around the country, visiting a national park, you've got the one choice in town. So see if my methodology passes your test. If we're going to try it, it either should be all veg, or if it's a meat one, then and they're serving buffet, then there should at least be something with goat or lamb. And if it doesn't meet either criteria, we'll probably give it a pass.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, Yeah, I have. I mean, I've often been around the States and there's not been that. But to be honest, there's nearly always some little diner somewhere that does, homemade pancakes and homemade burgers. And quite frankly, that'll do. That'll do me. So I think the thing I struggle with is because I'm so used to and I so love both Central Asian food, by which I mean South Asian, Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, and East Asian, so Japanese and Southeast Asian. Those foods I love. So even though, I could go to Italy, I adore Italian food. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you make me Italian food straight for 2 weeks with nothing else, I start hallucinating about something spicy. I'm just like, I need some Asian food. I don't even care right now whether it's Chinese or Indian or Malaysian, or I just need something. And I think that's the same for me when I go to the US. If it's small town US, the food can often be incredibly good. Mm-hmm. But as you said, there's not a huge choice. So I kind of find myself thinking, okay, I don't want any more burgers or pancakes. I just, So I think I've been very spoiled in that I've grown up with having a variety of food. The whole variety is a spice of life. I've been very lucky. And so when I don't get that, I struggle because I'm so used to having that switching food around. I mean, even when I used to go to India when I was a kid, I used to hate it because for 6 weeks, my family are vegetarian. I'm not, my Indian family. So they would just subsist on lentils and vegetables and lentils and vegetables for breakfast and lunch and dinner. And honest to God, for me, even though they were feeding me absolutely fantastic food, it felt like some kind of weird monotonous punishment because I just couldn't bear the idea of having lentils for breakfast, for lunch and for dinner. And even today, I'm like nearly 50, I still do not like lentils. So I think it's not so much about the food itself, it's the fact that I really love variety. So it could be the best food in the world, but if you give me nothing but that for the exception might be Japanese. I reckon I could eat Japanese food in Japan for like 10 weeks straight without a break. I mean, that's probably my only exception. I'm slightly obsessed with it, but
that's what my thought, if I ever take a retirement, it would be something like if there's an apartment on top of like Shinjuku Station in Tokyo where I could just go down, and it was like 10,000 restaurants within a 3-minute walk.
Yeah, I reckon I do similar, but probably in Kyoto because I love Kyoto. But yes, I do like. I mean, to be honest, if there was somehow some magic retirement, as you said, anywhere in Japan, even in rural Japan, I'd probably jump at it. But yeah, to be in one of the cities, and I did try and learn Japanese a few years ago, and I spent 6 months, and every single day before work, 7 days a week, I would spend half an hour trying to learn Japanese. And after that, I just gave up because I realized that all I could say is, this is my summer hat. The boy is swimming. And I just didn't get to the point where I could say anything useful. And I think and it was frustrating because when I was a kid, I was very good at languages. I found them very easy to pick up. But I've had to concede that there is a difference between a 48-year-old brain and a 17-year-old brain. Reluctantly, I've had to concede. So I would love to learn Japanese again. But I think the fantasy of my being offered a job there, given the field that I'm in, it would be vanishingly unlikely for it to be English language only. So sadly, because I keep thinking, oh, it'd be so great. And my friend's like, why don't you go and work? And I said, because all I could do is teach English as a foreign language. And honestly, at this stage of life, I don't think that it doesn't make sense for me career-wise. But yeah, if I won the lottery, if I played the lottery and then won the lottery, that would be it. Yeah, the thing on the top of Shinjuku, that would be all somewhere in Kyoto, or maybe 3 months in different places around Japan. That would totally work for me.
Oh yeah, that sounds fantastic. Another one cuisine we love is Portuguese, and I was curious about this clay pot wine, Vinho de.
Yeah, it was fascinating. I mean, I'm not actually a huge wine drinker. I don't drink a lot of wine, but I was just fascinated by this whole thing where they said, it used to be the traditional way of making wine, and you can still see it in some parts of Eastern Europe. They still make wine that way, but they have these huge. I realize I'm making shapes with my hand and nobody can see them. This huge kind of clay earthenware pots that are literally the height of a man. And they would put all the stuff in there, and then quite often they would bury them traditionally. They weren't doing that in the Portuguese one, but they would then, the wine was quite different because it would almost make a plug of stuff on top of the wine that they'd have to stir it. The whole technique was fascinating. And this one place had decided to resurrect this technique, and the wines that they produced from that were harder work because it was natural yeast. So rather than putting in, your very predictable wine yeast like most modern winemaking, they were looking for wild yeast to take control. So it's much, much less predictable. And some of the wines were spoiled, so they got a lot less, production out of the amount of grapes they used. But it was a fascinating process, and I kind of loved the whole recreating history. And they were saying, there aren't really any artisans making these great huge earthenware wine jugs anymore, because that's not how anybody makes wine anymore. So they've ended up going around the whole region looking for people that just have these old earthenwares lying out in the garden as decoration and persuading them to sell them. So yeah, no, fascinating visit actually, that vineyard. I've forgotten what its name is because I'm seeing that, but yeah, it was a really interesting place to visit.
And we'll close with two very recent of your lockdown silver linings and musings. So one, I'm curious what you've learned about food delivery, what to order, what works, what doesn't.
That's a very good one. Well, it's been really strange for us because normally where we live now in this new little village, when I say rural, there is really nothing here. So actually we didn't have anybody that delivered food to us before lockdown. So for the year we'd been here, we'd gone off and found local restaurants that we loved. Ironically, in lockdown, we had 2 or 3 places that had pivoted to delivering. So we actually had delivery options. We found a Persian place that we've absolutely loved called Taste of Persia. They're based in Monmouth, which is not that far away. And usually that Cameron, the guy who runs it, is catering big events, all the big music festivals, big food festivals. Obviously, that's completely shut down at the moment. So he has pivoted to doing takeaways of his food as delivery, and they work brilliantly because if it's the kind of thing that can easily be reheated, he sends it out, and you can just microwave it or heat it on a stove. With a few things, like if it's fresh fish or chicken, then he'll send it out marinated and ready but raw, so you can cook it yourself with instructions. So he kind of focuses on how the food will be best. So that's one thing. And then the other thing we found is we were trying very much to minimize going to supermarkets because obviously during lockdown it felt quite risky. None of us really know what we're doing. So we were very lucky that a friend of mine nearby said, oh, there's this local veg box scheme. It's not like most of the others where they're still getting it from some central depot. They literally grow all of the veg in their own plot. It's less than 2 miles from where I live. So we've actually switched to them, and I think we'll carry on getting our veg from them, even though we now can go back to the supermarkets. And there was also a favorite restaurant of ours in town, the Gaff they're called, and we love them. They're a really nice young couple. It's their first restaurant. They hadn't even gone a year since they launched it when lockdown happened. And what they did was, they had to close the restaurant, but they started cooking for NHS staff, the health service staff, by fundraising for it. But they also wanted to support their food supply. So obviously they have a really high quality food chain of we get our pork from these guys who grow it themselves. We get our so they've got a whole load of. And what they decided to do was essentially offer all their customers who were interested, and we were, the opportunity to order from them, and they would order in bulk from their suppliers and then split it down. And by that way, they were keeping their suppliers going, and we were able to support them as a restaurant. They've just reopened, which is really exciting. So I think probably the thing I've learned is really how important it is to support local. I mean, I've always been interested in local indies anyway, because as that I love. There's a place for chains. I would never slag off chains at all. There's some very, very good chain restaurants, but there's something very exciting about a really good independent local restaurant run by creative people. It's not like anybody else's restaurant. I find that very exciting. So I think probably the main thing for lockdown for me is how important it is to support your local independent businesses, both food ones, restaurant ones, whatever it is. That's probably the most important thing, I think.
Fantastic. And the joys of mortar and pestle. So beyond enjoying the Persian dish dizzy, one of my favorites and hard to find in restaurants, I do not have mortar and pestle. I don't do anything with it now. But it does seem back to earth and basics.
That's a lovely post, actually. It's a friend of mine that wrote that, Anna, and she has a fantastic outlook where she's not just looking at food in terms of the dishes, but she's very interested in the history of food and the culture of food and who tells the story of food. So she was also talking, I think it's either in that post or one of the others that she wrote for me, about when you talk about spices, the story of those spices is often told by what you might consider the ex-colonial powers, but actually the spices are grown all around the world. And one of her things is it would be really great to hear the stories of those food things from or written by or voiced by the people that know them and grow them and have a history with them. So that was some of the stuff that she's been writing about for me. So she's been musing about what it is in lockdown and how it's focused her thoughts on some of her historical connections to food, but also who tells the stories that we have about food. So yeah, some really interesting writing that she's been sharing, actually.
Oh, fantastic, and thank you for a wonderful discussion. Thank you for joining.
I did warn you, my grandma.
Have a great evening, everyone, and thank you
so
for
much for
joining
having
me, Kavita.
Thank you.